Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really jumping into a set of ideas that they kind of articulate a hidden truth about power, about public discourse.
Yeah, it's this realization, isn't it, that for some institutions, some leaders, the ethics we think we rely on, they're not boundaries anymore.
They're tools.
Exactly. Tools. Which is why we're doing this deep dive into scientific investigator Justin Lake's work, his framework around ethic gambling and moral camouflage.
Yeah.
It just gives us this vocabulary, for naming this strategic manipulation of trust.
Right. And our mission here, for you listening, is to go beyond just saying, oh, that's hypocrisy. We need to understand how the expectations we all share about fairness, transparency, integrity, how they're systematically turned into political currency, maybe economic currency.
Yeah, to expose machinery. The detailed mechanics of manipulation that Lake's work really shines a light on in, well, the modern institutional world.
And Lake's starting point, it's pretty radical, almost cynical, you could say.
It really is. The premise is that ethics aren't these fixed principles you follow anymore. No, they're strategic. They're malleable resources you spend. They're like an asset class.
An asset class.
Yeah. If a leader appears ethical, that appearance isn't just, nice to have. It's capital. Capital they can draw on later.
Okay. Let's start with that big provocative term then, ethic gambling. How is this different from, say, just a politician lying? That happens all the time.
Right, but lying is often tactical.
Yeah.
A specific fib for a specific situation. Ethic gambling, it's strategic. It's this calculated long-term act. You're treating whole populations or institutions or even cultural norms like pieces on a game board.
A game board.
Yeah. The gambler isn't just trying to deceive in the moment. They're trying to measure.
Yeah.
They're testing boundaries. They want to know exactly how much pushback, how much outrage a certain unethical action is going to generate.
And they use that data. How?
They leverage our own deep-seated need for things like justice and fairness. Those become the chips. It's like a high-stakes institutional casino.
Okay, so give me an example, like a pharmaceutical company maybe?
Okay, yeah. Imagine a pharma company releases some minor drug. Really expensive, not a game changer. But at the same time, they fund these highly visible, maybe low-impact charitable health clinics. They make a big show of it.
Right. Lots of PR.
Exactly. They're placing a bet there. They're betting that the public goodwill from the charity, that warm, fuzzy feeling, outweighs any real scrutiny of the drug pricing.
So they're maximizing profit and image while hiding the price gouging.
That's a perfect example. They are weaponizing the public's, inherent desire to believe that good things are being done. Lake points this out right away. Think about a corporation championing some popular, totally non-controversial cause, like funding local schools.
Sure, who's against that?
Nobody. So they build up this reservoir of trust. And then later, when they need to push through something unpopular, something that actually benefits their bottom line, they draw on that trust.
It's not about doing good at all. It's about collecting moral collateral.
Precisely. It's all about setting the stage, getting ready for that first big bet.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that initial stage then. The ethic gambler and the first bet. We need to define this player and, crucially, their tools. Because this isn't random, right? It's calculated.
Absolutely not random. The ethic gambler is defined by that calculation, by strategy. They're playing chess, but with moral resources, always looking several moves ahead. They understand that perception is primary. Action, that's secondary.
And the number one tool in the kit is moral camouflage. That's Lake's term. What does that actually look like?
Moral camouflage is, it's the essential cover. The primary disguise. It's this elaborate facade, this performance of virtue, built specifically to hide a self-serving goal, or maybe even a predatory one.
Like ethical drag.
That's a great way to put it. It's a highly visible public performance of integrity, designed to make you look there at the shiny virtue so you don't see the darker stuff happening underneath.
And besides the camouflage, what other tactic?
Well, meticulous narrative framing. Choosing exactly which facts to highlight, which ones to downplay or ignore, and manipulating the audience's ethical expectations, reinforcing the ones that serve the narrative.
So if the community values transparency, the gambler makes sure to release like one super polished, easy to understand report, something that looks good.
Exactly, while maybe burying 10 other complex reports that show the real picture.
Okay. And the goal is always?
Absolute. Advance power, maximize gain. All while making sure the manipulation stays hidden and opposition stays minimal. The whole game collapses if the audience stops believing the player is acting in good faith. It's all about leverage, converting that belief, that trust, into actual power.
Lake uses this hypothetical Mayor Q to show this leverage in action. The initial trust investment. Let's walk through that. How is trust actually manufactured here?
Yeah, this scenario is really key to understanding the mechanism. So Mayor Q launches their campaign, and it's focused heavily, very specifically on equitable access and reform for, say, historically underprivileged neighborhoods.
Okay, hitting all the right notes.
Totally. And the mayor builds trust through intense personal engagement, holding lots of town halls, consistently using the language of fairness, inclusion, equity in every single speech, every interview. This is the buying of the chips.
It's not just campaigning for votes.
No, it's about accumulating moral capital, especially from this group that's vulnerable, maybe has been let down before, but is highly hopeful.
So the community invests its hope, its moral capital in this leader.
Mm.
Based on these explicit promises of fairness. That's the deposit, right?
That's the deposit. Now comes the exploitation, the gamble.
The rug pull.
Pretty much. Once elected, once that goodwill is banked, Mayor Q executes the play. The betrayal is sudden, strategic. Budget priorities get redirected dramatically. Crucial funding is shifted away from those promised community programs, education, youth services, local infrastructure in the low-income areas.
Yeah,
Towards high-profile, maybe flashy commercial development projects, often in the affluent districts, things that look good on a city brochure.
Okay, that should cause massive outrage. So why doesn't it always, or why is it contained? This is the leverage part, isn't it?
This is exactly the leverage. Mayor Q's initial actions, all those town halls, the speeches, the press coverage, talking about their commitment to equity, that stuff is now used as moral collateral.
Collateral.
Yeah. The broader public, especially people who weren't directly harmed by the budget cut, they still associate the mayor with integrity because of that performance they saw during the campaign.
So the mayor uses the trust banked from the group they just betrayed
to deflect criticism from everyone else. The image champion of the poor, fighter for fairness, it remains sticky. It allows the mayor to kind of coast despite breaking these really crucial promises.
Because the public is slow to take back the trust they gave, it buys the mayor time.
Exactly that. It creates cognitive dissonance. People think, well, someone who spoke so passionately, who held all those meetings, they can't really be stabbing people in the back. There must be a good reason, a strategic reason we don't understand.
And Lake says this isn't just politics, right? This model applies elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. The model is portable because trust is portable.
Yeah.
Think about a corporate CEO launches a super visible employee resource group, maybe for marginalized employees, champions diversity publicly, big speeches, internal memos.
Looks great.
Looks fantastic. But simultaneously, maybe the internal promotion structures, the real power structures, still favor their own network or actively undermine the very groups the CEO claims to support.
So they're using the symbolic value of diversity, the camouflage,
as collateral, while exploiting internal ethical expectations, the gamble for their own influence or power. Lake also mentions nonprofit directors doing this, leveraging donor commitments. The donor expects their money to achieve X.
But the director shifts it to Y, their pet project.
Precisely. Overriding the stated ethical purpose using the initial trust given by the donor.
Wow. So in every case, trust is just transactional. It's currency to buy power or cover.
It's the fuel for the operation.
Okay, so the first bet's been made. The exploitation happened. The gambler leveraged the moral capital successfully. Now we get into this really destructive cycle of exploitation, starting with phase one, the turncoat phase, reinvesting that trust capital.
Right, and this phase really highlights the almost addictive nature of this for the ethic gambler. They don't just cash out and walk away. They immediately look to use the gains, the political capital, the financial resources, whatever they got from the betrayal, to fund the next scheme.
Getting away with it emboldens them.
Completely. The act of turning coat successfully becomes the foundation for escalation.
And the cost, like with Mayor Q, it's just pushed onto the exploited group, the neighborhoods that lost funding.
Entirely externalized. They are left, as Lake puts it, morally bankrupt. Their ethical expectations, their belief, their hope, those were the chips. And they've been spent, consumed by the gambler.
Devoured.
Yeah, devoured and converted into the gambler's power. It's not just losing funding, it's that psychological blow. Realizing your hopes were just seen as, well, disposable currency.
But the gambler needs to keep playing, right? How do they maintain any credibility with this pile of broken promises stacking up? Lake talks about a rolling debt of trust. How does that keep rolling?
This is where the illusion of consistency is key. The gambler keeps repeating their original mantra, "I've always stood for fairness." This was a tough but necessary strategic move for the long-term good of everyone, blah, blah, blah.
Keep saying it until people believe it.
Or at least until it muddies the waters. This constant repetition, this narrative reinforcement, it acts like a continuous deposit of symbolic virtue. It obscures the actual growing deficit of real integrity.
So it's like an unaudited line of credit. But why doesn't that debt ever get properly audited? Why don't people call it in?
Well, think about it. It takes real, sustained effort to audit broken promises, especially complex ones like budget reallocations. The betrayal is often deliberately wrapped in jargon, technical details, strategic complexity.
Making it hard to follow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the public, the media, we have short attention spans, right? The gambler knows this. Wait long enough, make a few small, symbolic gestures, little deposits, and the initial outrage fades. People assume the ledger must have balanced out somehow just because the noise stopped. The complexity itself becomes a shield.
And that lack of audit, that leads directly to the next phase, doesn't it? Phase 2, the aftermath, the moral exhaustion of the public. This sounds like it goes way beyond politics. It's cultural.
It absolutely is. What's critical here is the psychological toll. When people realize they're not just dealing with mistakes, but with systematic, calculated betrayal, where their own trust is the weapon used against them, cynicism just becomes the default setting.
Yeah, I think we all feel that sometimes, that weariness when another scandal breaks. You almost feel tired before you even know the detail.
That fatigue. That's the intended and really tragic consequence. Lake argues the whole moral baseline shifts downwards. We start to expect bad behavior. People become hesitant to trust claims of integrity.
Not because they don't believe in ethics anymore.
No, but because the language of ethics, from their experience, has been weaponized against them. It's not a guidepost. It's the camouflage for the next betrayal.
So the moral currency itself gets devalued because it keeps being used in these fraudulent ways.
Precisely. And on a societal scale, this exhaustion, it leads to numbness, widespread numbness about corruption. When every big ethical breach is met with the same playbook, the strategic reframing, the symbolic apology, the ethical theater.
People learn their outrage doesn't really change anything.
Exactly. It's temporary, ultimately ineffective. So the result is apathy. The ethic gambler has successfully eroded the leverage, the power that genuine moral principles used to have.
When the ability to be outraged gets exhausted, that's a really dangerous spot for a democracy.
It leaves the public passive, vulnerable to more manipulation.
Okay, so the cycle moves on. The gamblers pulled off the first big betrayal, maybe weathered some initial heat. Now they have to manage the fallout, right? Which brings us to phase 3, the cover-up, reframing, moral camouflage. Lake calls it ethical laundering. Brilliant term.
Isn't it? And the key is, the gambler is a master of the pivot. They don't hide or retreat. They lean in. They engage in intense ethical theater.
Ethical theater, like a performance.
A deliberate, staged performance designed purely to maintain that facade of virtue while, scrubbing the stain, moral and sometimes financial, of the previous act.
So how does it work? How do they redefine the betrayal?
Quickly and publicly. The action itself, that harmful budget shift, for instance, is reframed. It wasn't a betrayal. It was necessary or strategic or maybe just misunderstood by people who were, too emotional or don't see the big picture. They flood the zone with just enough complex, official-sounding justification to keep people confused, morally off balance.
Going back to Mayor Q, how does the mayor launder that budget reallocation?
Okay, so Mayor Q publicly frames redirecting funds from community centers to, say, corporate development as a strategic investment for city growth. Claims it will benefit everyone eventually. Trickle down, right?
The classic line.
Yep. But they don't stop there. They follow up with highly visible symbolic acts. Maybe signing a proclamation for a new city integrity day, or doing a big photo op, donating a small symbolic amount to some unrelated charity. Anything to reinforce the image of integrity.
And the moral camouflage, its role here is to turn that past betrayal into ongoing collateral.
That's it, exactly. Laundering makes the betrayal productive for the next step. They use the appearance of virtue, the ribbon cutting, the proclamation, to distract from the real negative impact of what they actually did. Lake says the betrayal gets washed through rhetoric and symbols until it's basically indistinguishable from virtue again.
It's like a deep cleaning system for bad deeds.
A moral filtration system, yeah, where cynical self-interest comes out looking like difficult, noble public service.
Okay, so once the betrayal is successfully laundered, we hit phase 4 immediately. The next bet. Escalation of risk. The gloves come off now.
You could say that. This is the point where the gambler truly internalizes how pliable the system is. They got away with it. They exploited trust, banked the gain, laundered the deficit, all without real consequences. So the next bets have to get bolder.
What kind of escalation are we talking about?
Lake suggests it moves into actions with much bigger stakes, maybe changing laws to benefit allies or donors, engaging in wars of convenience masked as necessity, pushing through massive corporate mergers that harm consumers but enrich insiders, launching deep ideological crusades presented as moral imperatives.
So they're not just playing defense anymore, trying to get away with something. They're actively using this playbook on offense.
Totally. They're addicted to the leverage. The motivation isn't even just about the external goal anymore. It's about maintaining the game itself. They get addicted to the thrill of manipulating moral expectations, addicted to the power that comes from converting ethical capital into control. The game becomes the reward.
This progression from one person manipulating to, well, everyone doing it, that seems to lead somewhere even darker. Section 4, the ethic market and collapse. Phase 5 is the ethic market itself. Morality becomes tradable.
Yes. As more and more ethic gamblers operate across different sectors, politics, business, media, even nonprofits, their behavior stops being isolated incidents. It starts to coalesce. It forms an unspoken economy, the ethic market.
An economy based on ethics.
Or the appearance of ethics.
Yeah.
The core insight here is that ethical values get stripped of their intrinsic meaning. They're priced, they're traded, they're speculated upon, just like stocks or commodities.
Wow. So if a company suddenly takes a big stand on a social issue, we shouldn't just assume it's conviction. It might be an investment.
It absolutely could be.
Yeah.
An investment designed purely for a positive PR return. Virtue becomes essentially public relations equity. Think about apologies, too, or promised reforms, or even firing someone symbolically after a scandal.
Those become hedges against backlash.
Exactly. They're hedges against future moral outrage. The whole market, Lake argues, runs on what he calls moral perception volatility.
Moral perception volatility, that's quite a term. Break that down.
It's the constant ups and downs, the fluctuation in the public's emotional and ethical response to events. Think about how fast outrage can flare up on social media, and then how quickly it can fade or shift to the next thing. That's high volatility.
And the gambler plays this volatility.
Like a day trader. They know exactly when to issue a statement, when to make that symbolic apology, when to just lay low and wait for the news cycle to move on. What drives volatility? Media hype, the general political mood, even the perceived moral stature of the person involved. A big fall from grace creates huge waves. A known scoundrel doing something minor, barely a ripple. The gambler manages their risk based on predicting these fluctuations.
Can you give some examples of specific trades in this market? Lake identifies some core transactions, right?
He does. Clear examples. First, corporations trading sustainability pledges. You know, these often vague long-term commitments they might never actually meet. What do they buy with that? Immediate consumer goodwill? Better ESG scores, maybe? An improved brand image. They're buying present loyalty with future, maybe illusory virtue.
Okay, what else?
Second, politicians sell apologies. These carefully scripted, managed, often very non-specific apologies. What are they buying? Short-term legitimacy. A way to maybe head off calls for resignation or investigation. It's a transaction purely to control the narrative.
And the third?
Third, and Lake suggests this might be the most corrosive, media outlets auction outrage. They sell our attention spans, our moral focus, to the highest emotional bidder. They capitalize on our appetite for moral drama by prioritizing content that generates clicks and shares, often over nuance or objective analysis.
So the ethic gambler in this market phase isn't just a player anymore. They're actually making the market, setting the price for forgiveness.
Yes. They become market makers of morality itself. They dictate the terms of trade for appearing virtuous.
But markets built on speculation, they tend to crash, don't they? Which leads to phase 6, the collapse, ethical inflation, and the devaluation of virtue.
Exactly. It's almost inevitable in Lake's model.
What causes the moral currency, this trust, to finally lose its value?
Saturation, mainly, and exposure. When too many players are engaged in this constant ethical speculation, when the public is just bombarded day after day with a gap between the performance of virtue and the reality of conduct, the currency gets inflated. It loses meaning.
Like printing too much money.
Precisely. If virtue is endlessly leveraged, repackaged, sold off, without any real substance backing it, people just stop believing in the transactions. They stop trusting the currency.
And that leads to ethical inflation, where it costs more and more to achieve basic trust.
Yes. Lake notes that suddenly grand, almost absurd moral gestures are required. Massive internal reforms, very public acts of penance, huge billion-dollar charitable funds. just to get back to the baseline level of public trust that simple honesty used to buy.
The price of virtue goes way up, but its actual value goes down.
Exactly. The cost skyrockets, but its utility plummets. And the ultimate crash. It's the public's moral economy collapsing into deep apathy, what Lake calls a recession of meaning.
A recession of meaning. Wow. That's chilling. People just don't have the moral energy left to care or to demand better.
They're just exhausted from being played. And the terrible irony here, Lake suggests, is that this apathy often leads to the gambler's own final defeat. They're left playing their intricate games in a casino where the chips, the trust, the virtue they spent years manipulating are now worthless.
Because the audience, the public, has just walked away. They're no longer participating in that moral economy.
Yeah. The manipulation just stops working because no one's buying it anymore.
Which brings us right back to the beginning, in a way, to Lake's conclusion in Section 5, connecting the two core concepts, the mirror of moral camouflage.
Right. Lake really insists these aren't separate things. Ethic gambling and moral camouflage are interdependent. They're mirror images. They form a single, self-sustaining system of exploitation. You really can't understand one without the other.
Okay, so let's nail down those functions one last time. The interdependence.
Okay. Moral camouflage provides the cover. That's the essential facade, the mask of righteousness. It lets the whole operation proceed without being immediately obvious. It hides the wrongdoing.
And ethic gambling.
That provides the engine. That's the transactional part, the exploitation of trust that happens underneath the camouflage. It converts that concealment into profit, power, influence. One hides the move, the other monetizes the illusion.
So together they create this ecosystem where performance, appearance completely replaces authenticity. Ethics just becomes theater, a branding exercise.
And the biggest damage from this cycle, it's the corrosion of society's actual moral foundation. When deception consistently masquerades as virtue and gets away with it, Lake argues the moral language itself breaks down. It loses meaning.
So the words we rely on to govern ourselves, to have debates, justice, integrity, fairness, they stop being principles.
They become purely linguistic tools, instruments of persuasion, branding buzzwords used just to manage how the audience perceives you.
This whole evolution we've tracked from the single shady mayor to the systemic ethic market Lake calls it the commodification of conscience.
That's his ultimate definition. The point where our shared moral commitments are treated as nothing more than futures contracts to be bought and sold.
It's a really stark picture. The final warning he leaves us with is about a civilization that basically stops asking, is this right or wrong, and instead only debates, is it profitable to appear right or wrong?
Yeah. And when that distinction blurs or is lost entirely, the quiet collapse of the moral architecture, the structure that's supposed to link power to principle, is pretty much complete.
Wow, okay. This deep dive into Lake's framework, it really does provide a crucial lens, doesn't it? It gives us, and you listening, the language to analyze what's going on, to see past the camouflage and political statements, corporate PR, institutional actions.
Yeah, to see the underlying transactional math. And the primary threat, Lake makes clear, isn't just that some leaders are dishonest sometimes. The real danger is that systems are being built specifically to harvest and exploit our collective desire for ethical behavior. It's the systemic breakdown of the moral infrastructure of public life.
And we've established that if this cycle runs unchecked, that ethic market eventually crashes into that recession of meaning, where the trust chips are worthless, apathy rules.
Lake paints a very clear, maybe bleak picture of that end state. A civilization just running on moral fumes, having completely exhausted its reserves of trust.
So let's leave you with a final provocative thought building on all this. If the ultimate endgame for the ethic gambler is to make the currency of virtue worthless through constant manipulation, what's left? Are there any human actions, commitments, maybe institutions that can genuinely withstand this kind of calculated systemic speculation?
That's the question, isn't it? What moral act is so authentic, so deeply rooted in something untradeable that it just cannot be camouflaged, leveraged, or sold off for future gain?
Maybe think about that this week, where you place your own trust. And ask yourself, can that investment actually be audited? Or is it just another chip in the game?